the most toughest criminal in Pelican Bay in America. Deep in the far northern corner of California lies a prison designed to break men. Pelican Bay State Prison isn't just another lockup. It's where the state sends the ones they fear most. Killers who kill inside prison. Shot callers who control gang empires stretching coast to coast. Men so violent and uncontrollable that the only way to contain them is through steel doors, windowless cells, and silence. But within this nightmare of isolation, one man's name echoes louder than the rest. The man guards feared. The man other prisoners obeyed. The man whispered about in both the yards and the streets. The toughest criminal in Pelican Bay. Before we reveal his name, we need to understand why Pelican Bay is unlike any other prison in America. Pelican Bay opened in 1989, at the height of California's gang wars. The streets of Los Angeles, Oakland, and San Diego were blood-soaked battlefields. Drive-bys and drug wars were out of control, and the gangs weren't stopping once members were locked up. Instead, prisons became command centers. Leaders inside ordered hits on rivals, witnesses, even judges and police. So California built Pelican Bay, not as a place for rehabilitation, but as a weapon. A fortress to crush prison gangs like the Mexican Mafia, Nuestra Familia, Aryan Brotherhood, and Black Guerrilla Family. Its most infamous wing, the Security Housing Unit, known simply as the SHU, was a place of sensory deprivation. Prisoners spent 22.5 hours per day in concrete boxes the size of a parking space. No phone calls, no contact visits, just silence, steel, and concrete. Among the first wave of inmates sent to Pelican Bay were the so-called shot callers of California's prison gangs. These weren't just criminals, they were warlords in a hidden underworld. And in this crucible, one man stood out. He was known by a nickname that struck fear even before his crimes made headlines. He was ruthless, calculating, and impossible to break. He had survived gang wars, assassination attempts, and solitary confinement that drove other men insane. He turned the SHU, designed to destroy him, into his personal command post. From behind steel doors, he moved money, drugs, and death like a general commanding an invisible army. But what makes him the toughest? To answer that, we need to step into the culture of violence that defined Pelican Bay in the 1990s and 2000s. Pelican Bay's general population yard wasn't like other prisons. There were no basketball games or casual strolls. Every man out there was either preparing for war or waiting to be killed. Racial divisions were absolute. Whites with whites, blacks with blacks, Hispanics split between norteños and sureños. One wrong look, one wrong word, and blood spilled. In this environment, toughness wasn't about lifting weights or throwing punches. It was about survival. It was about being able to command respect so strong that even enemies thought twice before crossing you. And that's what set this man apart. Prisoners whispered his name in fear. Guards noted it in hushed tones during briefings. Even investigators in Sacramento had entire files dedicated to him. He wasn't the biggest man in Pelican Bay. He wasn't the loudest. But he was the most feared because he had the one thing nobody else did: control. The ability to bend others to his will, even from the darkest hole in the prison. The state tried to break him with solitary confinement. They cut off visits, intercepted letters, blocked phone calls. But somehow, orders still leaked out. Hits were still carried out. Drugs still flowed. Money still moved, and it all traced back to him. He didn't start as a legend. Like many, he grew up in neighborhoods where survival meant choosing a gang before you could even choose a career. As a teenager, he was already known for his fearlessness. By his 20s, he had committed acts of violence that would mark him for life. By his 30s, prison was no longer punishment. It was his empire. And Pelican Bay? That was his throne. California knew they couldn't let one man control an empire from inside Pelican Bay. The Department of Corrections created special intelligence units just to track him. They flipped informants, bugged cells, monitored every scrap of mail. But he always seemed to be 2 steps ahead. When one soldier fell, another rose to take his place. When one drug route closed, a new one opened. When guards thought they had him cornered, violence erupted in another yard hundreds of miles away, proving his reach extended far beyond those walls. To the state, he was the embodiment of the prison gang problem. To the gangs, he was proof that power could never be caged. It wasn't his muscles. It wasn't his tattoos. It wasn't even the number of lives he had taken or ordered taken. What made him the toughest criminal in Pelican Bay was his endurance. The system threw everything it had at him: solitary, lockdowns, raids, indictments. And yet he never broke, never flipped, never begged, never surrendered. Other men lost their minds in the SHU. Some mutilated themselves, some hanged themselves, some begged to be transferred anywhere else. But not him. For him, the SHU was just another battlefield. And in that battlefield, he always seemed to win. But who is he? And how did one man rise to become the most feared prisoner in America's toughest prison? In the next chapter, we'll peel back the layers: his childhood, his gang ties, and the moment that transformed him from just another criminal into a legend of Pelican Bay. Before Pelican Bay locked him away in a concrete box, before his name became synonymous with fear, he was just a boy. But his childhood wasn't filled with playgrounds or cartoons. It was filled with poverty, broken families, and a neighborhood ruled not by police, but by gangs. The streets were his first school, and in those streets, he learned the only lesson that mattered: be feared or be forgotten. He was born in the late 1960s, at a time when Los Angeles was undergoing a violent transformation. Factories were closing, jobs were disappearing, and entire neighborhoods were crumbling under poverty. For families like his, survival meant adapting, or being swallowed whole. His father disappeared early, leaving his mother to raise him and his siblings alone. She worked long hours, but the money was never enough. They lived in apartments where gunshots echoed at night, and drug deals went down in broad daylight. For most kids, the streets were dangerous. For him, they were an invitation. By age 12, he was already running errands for older gang members. At first, it was small things: watching corners, carrying packages, delivering messages. But it didn't take long before he was tested. In one story whispered by neighbors, a rival gang confronted him outside a corner store. Instead of running, he fought back. He was beaten badly, but he didn't cry. He didn't beg. That night, the older gangsters noticed. They saw something in him: a hardness, a refusal to fold under pressure, and that was enough to bring him deeper into the fold. In neighborhoods where families were broken and opportunities were scarce, gangs became replacements. They offered protection, identity, and belonging. He was no different. By his mid-teens, he was officially jumped in. The initiation was brutal. Several older members beat him for minutes straight. But he didn't go down. He didn't scream. When it was over, he was bloodied and barely standing, but he was smiling. He had earned their respect. From that moment on, the gang wasn't just his crew, it was his family. And family meant loyalty above all else. His rap sheet began early: burglary, assault, auto theft. Juvenile detention centers became his second home. But instead of breaking him, those institutions sharpened him. He learned how to fight, how to manipulate guards, how to earn respect, even inside locked walls. One probation officer wrote in a report, "This young man does not seem afraid of anything. He thrives in environments where most kids crumble." By 18, he had already been arrested multiple times, but the streets called louder than any judge's warning. The act that sealed his fate came in his early 20s. Details vary depending on who tells the story. Some say it was a drive-by shooting against a rival gang. Others claim it was a cold-blooded execution in a back alley. What's known for sure is this: a man was dead, bullets were fired, and he was the shooter. That night changed everything. He wasn't just another street soldier anymore. He was a killer. And killers don't just get street respect, they get prison time. When the judge handed down his sentence, decades behind bars, he didn't flinch. While other young men wept or begged for leniency, he stared straight ahead, cold and unblinking. In that moment, he wasn't being sentenced to punishment. He was being delivered to the world where he truly belonged. the prison system. He entered the California Department of Corrections in the late 1980s, at a time when prison yards were more dangerous than the streets. Riots were common. Stabbings were daily. Racial politics controlled everything. And for a man like him, this was the perfect environment to rise. Prison was a test, and he passed it with violence. Within months of arrival, he was already involved in multiple fights. Guards quickly noted that he didn't just defend himself, he dominated. In one infamous incident, when rival gang members cornered him in the showers, he fought them all off with nothing but a padlock wrapped in a sock. Word spread quickly. He wasn't just tough, he was fearless. And fearlessness in prison is currency. In California prisons, gangs are more powerful than in the streets. Behind bars, the Mexican Mafia, Aryan Brotherhood, Black Guerrilla Family, and Nuestra Familia control drugs, gambling, and even murders. To survive, you needed backing. For him, survival wasn't enough. He wanted control. Through loyalty, violence, and strategic alliances, he climbed the ranks. He became a soldier, then an enforcer, and eventually a shot caller. His orders carried weight. His reputation was sealed. Many men rise in gangs. Many commit violence. But what made him different was his ability to combine brutality with intelligence. He wasn't just a fighter. He was a thinker. He studied prison politics like a chessboard. He knew when to strike, when to wait, when to sacrifice a pawn to win the bigger game. And slowly, guards and investigators began to realize this wasn't just another inmate. This was someone who could run an empire from behind bars. By the late 1980s, California was overwhelmed by gang violence inside its prisons. They needed a way to isolate the worst of the worst. The answer was Pelican Bay. And when the first busloads of problem inmates were shipped north, his name was on the list. Visual: prison bus drives along a lonely forest road toward the massive gates of Pelican Bay. When those gates clanged shut behind him, he wasn't intimidated. He wasn't broken. He was ready. Pelican Bay was supposed to contain him. Instead, it became the stage where his legend would grow. He entered Pelican Bay as a young man already hardened by violence. But inside those walls, he would transform from a feared inmate into something far more dangerous, a myth, a symbol, the very definition of prison power. Visual: slow zoom on the SHU's steel door, light flickering across the cold surface. In the next chapter, we'll step inside Pelican Bay itself, into the concrete tombs of the SHU, where he built his empire and proved why even the most secure prison in America couldn't break him. Pelican Bay was built to break men, but for him, it became the place where his legend was born. And this is only the beginning. If you want to uncover more of America's darkest prison secrets, make sure you subscribe, hit the bell, and join us for the next chapter of the Crime Files TV. Until then, stay safe, and remember, behind every wall, there's a story they don't want you to know.